Picture yourself standing in the heart of the modern Iraqi desert. All around you, for miles, there is nothing but wind and sand. But then you see it. The ruins of a colossal tower, a stepped pyramid of sun-baked brick, reaching for a sky that has long forgotten its name. This was the city of Ur, the capital of the Sumerian kings. For centuries, this was the glowing heart of the known world, the center of humanity's first great civilization. But it wasn't built to last. 4,000 years ago, the old world began to crack, not just from the inside, but from a new people, sweeping in from the west, a people without cities, without kings, a nomadic tide that the civilized world dismissed as savages. They were the Amorites. This is the story of how these outsiders took advantage of a dying empire, brought a civilization to its knees, and from its ashes, grabbed a dusty, insignificant town on the Euphrates River and turned it into a name that would echo through all of human history, Babylon. To understand the world the Amorites were about to shatter, we have to go back to the 21st century BC, to the golden age of Sumer. The land between the Tigris and Euphrates rivers was a miracle of human will. A flat, dry plain that was transformed by a web of canals into the breadbasket of the ancient world. This is where we first learned to live in cities, to write, to create laws, and to build temples that seemed to scrape the heavens. The capital, Ur, was a wonder. Its king was the chosen shepherd of the gods, and he commanded a bureaucracy that would make a modern government jealous. Archaeologists have found thousands of clay tablets, and they show a society obsessed with order. Scribes wrote down every bushel of barley, every head of cattle, every single jar of beer that moved through the kingdom. The king, Ur-Nammu, gave the world one of its first law codes. His son, Shulgi, ruled for almost 50 years in an age of peace and wealth, completing the great ziggurat of Ur, a monument to the moon god. To the people living then, it must have seemed like their world was perfect, that their civilization was the final form of human society. It must have felt eternal. But no golden age lasts forever. The foundations of Ur were starting to crack. The empire was fighting threats on all sides, but the most unsettling came from the west, the Amorites. To the settled, sophisticated Sumerians, these people were everything they were not. When I first read this Sumerian text describing them, it sent a shiver down my spine. It's just dripping with contempt. The Martu who know no grain, the Martu who know no house nor town, the boors of the mountains, who does not bend his knees to cultivate the land, who eats raw meat, who has no house during his lifetime, who is not buried after death. Can you feel the disgust in those words? These were nomads, tent-dwelling shepherds who moved with their flocks. They weren't a single army marching under one banner. They were a slow, relentless human tide pushing against the empire's borders. For generations, they had drifted into Mesopotamia. Sometimes they came to trade, sometimes to raid, but they were always there, just on the edge of the light. The Sumerian kings knew the danger. They built a massive wall, 170 miles long, trying to seal off their fertile heartland from the barbarians. It was a desperate, monumental effort, and it was completely useless. The wall was too long to defend. The Amorites didn't smash through it. They just walked around it. This pressure wasn't just a military problem, it was an economic one. The constant incursions wrecked trade and farming. The highly centralized state, which owned the land and directed the labor, started to seize up. Grain shipments failed. Famine began to stalk the land. The empire was stretched too thin, too rigid to adapt. And as the king's power faded, governors in far-off cities started to get ideas of their own. The great Sumerian state was rotting from the inside, just as the pressure was building from the outside. The light of Sumer was fading, creating a power vacuum. and the people everyone had underestimated were perfectly positioned to fill it. The end of the Sumerian world wasn't a single battle. It was a death by 1,000 cuts. The Amorite migrations had bled the empire dry, leaving it weak and exposed to its old enemies. Around 2004 BC, the Elamites, from the highlands of modern Iran, saw their chance. They swept down onto the plains and laid siege to Ur itself, and the capital of the world fell. Its temples were plundered. Its streets ran red. The last Sumerian king was dragged off in chains, a ghost, never to be seen again. The shock of Ur's fall was a cataclysm. A surviving Sumerian poem mourns the city's fate, and it is absolutely heartbreaking. Ur, inside there is death. Outside there is death. Inside we succumb to famine. Outside we are dispatched by Elamite blades. In its boulevards, where the feasts were celebrated, scattered they lay. With Ur gone, the power that had held Mesopotamia together for a century simply vanished. The land exploded into a mosaic of warring city-states. It was a chaotic free-for-all, where the only law was the sword. And in this chaos, the Amorites made their move. They weren't just raiders anymore. They had spent generations serving as mercenaries in Sumerian armies, learning their tactics, their politics, their technology. They understood how the system worked. As the old order collapsed, these Amorite warlords saw the ultimate opportunity. They had no loyalty to the old traditions. They were pragmatic, ambitious, and utterly ruthless. One by one, Amorite leaders seized control of the very cities they had been paid to defend. This wasn't an invasion. It was a hostile takeover from within. An Amorite chieftain became king in the powerful city of Larsa. Another took over Ison. Within a century, the faces on the thrones of Mesopotamia had all changed. The rulers now had Amorite names, not Sumerian ones. A new warrior aristocracy had taken power. It's in this violent, shifting world, around the year 1894 BC, that our story brings us to a small town on the Euphrates. A town that at the time was almost a footnote. Its Akkadian name was Bab-Elim, the Gate of the God. Here, an Amorite chieftain named Sumu Abum decided to carve out his own little patch of dirt. He seized the town, which we know as Babylon, declared himself independent, and built a wall. This was not some glorious conquest. When I first learned this, it completely changed how I saw the event. Sumu Abum's kingdom was so small, so insignificant, that he and his first few successors didn't even call themselves King of Babylon. They were just one tiny kingdom among giants, fighting for their lives. They were surrounded by wolves, and survival was a long shot. But Sumu Abum had chosen his ground well. Babylon sat on the Euphrates, controlling key trade routes, while the great kings of the south were busy fighting each other for the phantom crown of Sumer. The upstart dynasty in Babylon quietly built up its strength. They were patient. They were building something new, not trying to claw back the past. And little did anyone know that from this scrappy backwater kingdom would rise the man who would conquer them all. For 100 years, the Amorite kingdom of Babylon played the long game, a minor piece on a very dangerous board. Then, in 1792 BC, the sixth king of the dynasty took the throne. His name was Hammurabi, and he would change the world. When Hammurabi came to power, Babylon was still a second-rate power. To the south was the mighty kingdom of Larsa. To the east, the city of Eshnunna and the armies of Elam. To the north, another powerful Amorite king, Shamshi-Adad, had built his own empire. Hammurabi was completely surrounded. A lesser man would have been happy just to survive. But Hammurabi was a rare combination of military genius, political cunning, and terrifying ambition. For the first 30 years of his reign, he played the part of the minor king beautifully. He built up his city's walls, improved its temples, and postured as a just and peaceful ruler. He was the perfect junior partner in the great game of alliances, always reliable, always helpful. He even helped Larsa drive the invading Elamites out of Mesopotamia. He was just biding his time, waiting for the perfect moment. And then, he struck. With the Elamite threat gone, Hammurabi revealed his true self. He turned on his former allies with breathtaking speed. He would ally with a city's enemies to crush it, then turn on those same allies when they were weakened. It was a masterclass in betrayal and strategy. First, he took the ancient southern cities of Uruk and Isin. Then he went for the throat, marching on Larsa itself. In 1763 BC, the great southern kingdom fell, and its king was captured. With one brutal campaign, Hammurabi had eliminated his chief rival and become the master of southern Mesopotamia. His armies, now hardened veterans, then marched north, conquering Eshnunna. A year later, he destroyed the great kingdom of Mari. In a whirlwind of campaigns, Hammurabi had done what no one had managed since the fall of Ur. He unified Mesopotamia under a single ruler, and for the first time, this entire land began to be seen as one nation, centered on one capital. This is where the idea of Babylonia is truly born. But Hammurabi's genius wasn't just on the battlefield. He knew you couldn't hold an empire with swords alone. It needed rules. It needed order. His most famous legacy is not a battle, but an idea carved into a pillar of black stone. The Code of Hammurabi. Imagine seeing this nearly 8-foot-tall monument in the city center. It was topped with a carving of Hammurabi receiving the laws from the sun god, the god of justice. We've all heard the most famous line, "An eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth." But the code is so much more than that. It covers commerce, family, crime, and property. And it's not a code of equality. The punishment often depended on your social status. But it was a standard. For the first time, the laws were written down for all to see, a public promise from the king, granted by the gods, to prevent the strong from oppressing the weak. Under Hammurabi, Babylon was transformed from a minor town into a magnificent capital. He elevated its obscure local god, Marduk, to the head of the entire pantheon, declaring that all the other gods had willingly given him power, just as their cities had given power to Babylon. The Amorite conquest was complete. The people who had wandered out of the desert, dismissed as homeless savages, had become the new masters. They didn't destroy Mesopotamian civilization. They absorbed it, adopted it, and then reforged it in their own image. The empire Hammurabi built didn't last long after his death. His successors couldn't hold it together. New invaders, the Kassites, were now pressing on the borders. The end finally came in 1595 BC, when a distant army from the Anatolian highlands, the Hittites, marched all the way down the Euphrates, sacked the supposedly unconquerable city of Babylon, and carried away the statue of its god, Marduk. The Amorite dynasty was shattered, and just like that, the Amorites as a people seemed to simply vanish from the pages of history, and the Hittite sack of Babylon marked the end of the Amorite age. And yet, their impact was permanent. The conquest that started with a small-time chieftain grabbing a patch of land fundamentally remade the ancient world. The Amorites were there to witness the final flickering end of the Sumerian people, but they didn't put out the light. They picked up the torch. They replaced a world of squabbling cities with the idea of a unified kingdom, a concept that would define empires for thousands of years. In Hammurabi, they gave us the archetype of the lawgiver king, a name that became a synonym for justice. And they took a town no one cared about and turned it into the center of the world, a city whose legend would outlive its own walls. The story of the Amorites is a powerful reminder that history is rarely made by those clinging to a glorious past. It's written by the outsiders, the hungry, the ambitious ones who see the cracks in the old world and have the audacity to build something new from the ruins. They took a name few had ever heard and made it a name no one would ever forget. If you found this story as fascinating as I do, please give this video a like and subscribe to the channel for more stories about the rise and fall of civilizations. Your support is what lets us keep bringing the ancient world back to life. Thanks for watching.